And welcome to Africa News Network, First Fast Live, coming to you from our Midrand studios. My name is Cindy Mabi. Good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Police Minister Fikile Mbalula says the South African Defence Force will be deployed to areas worst affected by criminal activities and gang violence. Mbalula was engaging community members at the Philippi West Police Station. In October, Mbalula called on the SANDF to assist police in stemming out high levels of crime in the Western Cape and Gauteng. Mbalula says his department is processing operational plans, and once these are complete, President Jacob Zuma is then expected to approve the plans before implementation.
Defense Force does not do policing. So when we deploy them, we must link them to an operation. Here in the Western Cape, and probably will add the Eastern Cape because the northern areas have exploded, and the parts of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. So when you sign for the soldiers, you must know where are they going and what they are going to do, so that the directive is very clear. So SANDF will be deployed very soon in the different, and when that happens, you will actually know, and it will be properly explained to you. But it will be police-led, so that we understand we deploy them for a specific reason in violent areas where gangsters are actually taking over and doing what they are doing.
And with all these interventions to stem out crime, we ask if this is an admission by Minister Fikile Mbalula that the police force is not equipped to handle gang-related crime. And you're welcome to give us a call 011-542-2186 or join us on social media at ANN7 TV. And we're joined in studio by Oliver Dixon, social-political analyst, and on the phone line, Ahmed Sheikh Imam, a National Freedom Party member of Parliament. Good evening to both of you, and thanks so much for joining us. Let's just start with you, Mr. Imam, in the sense that Police Minister perhaps finding himself out of his depth in what to do with this rampant crime. What is your view?
Good evening to you, Cindy, and good evening to the listeners out there. I think the decision by the minister is long overdue. We have the NFP have been calling for this for the last 2.5 years. Crime situation, specifically in some of the areas like the Western Cape, is totally out of control. People live in fear every day of their life. Innocent people are dying every day. Innocent people, children, women, even bypassers are just being shot and killed by these gang violence that's taking place. Added to that is the serious challenges that we've had, and I think you've heard in the news in the last couple of days of what has happened in the Manenberg and the Mitchells Plain police stations in terms of all the guns that were stolen, and all these guns were in the hands of gangsters and drug dealers. So clearly, and I don't believe it is that the police is not able to deal with the matter, or they failed, and as such that they need the army. The problem has escalated to a level that the South African police services need to beef up support, and I think bringing in the South African National Defence Force to give them that added advantage and support, and remember it will be police-led. And I think it's going to do a lot of good, and I think once and for all we need to go out into this area and give back to the townships and the streets to the people in the Western Cape and other areas, even in KwaZulu-Natal and other provinces. All
right, please stay on the line. We engage Oliver Dixon, social-political analyst. Now, with all these other subcultures happening in these communities, typically gangsterism being almost a norm, if you don't deal with the root causes of what brings about these narcotics and violence-driven crimes, how then are you going to permanently deal with the crime issue?
Yeah, there must be a very clear distinction made in terms of what the problem is. The problem with drugs is a separate problem from the problem with gangsterism. Gangsterism, however, is just a convenient vehicle to continue and spreading the drug scourge across South Africa. That's to say that gangsters, gang lords, and these sort of people aren't really the real drug dealers. It is people with deep pockets, with deep infrastructure and high connections that are the real drug syndicates. They just happen to use gangsters who, one, have the community at ransom, two, are feared by many people, and have the cooperation of, in many instances, the police force to be able to distribute their drugs. This has been the nature of any drug problem just about anywhere in the world. So importantly, again, the principal question you asked at the beginning of this segment was whether this proclamation by Fikile Mbalula is an admission, finally, that the South African police services is unequipped or ill-equipped to deal with the drug problem? Importantly, the answer is yes, the South African Police Service is ill-equipped to deal with the drug problem because the South African police extensively, well, I want to correct that members of the South African police are complicit to the South African drug problem. That's to say the drug problem can only continue to exist insofar as the police cooperate. Oftentimes, like the people, like the mothers of El Dorado Park and Kliptown have been telling us for years. They even told President Jacob Zuma this on his last visit there, that the police know who the gangsters are because time and time again the community points them to the lolly hazers and the guys who push around the drugs, but yet nothing really happens because the police are complicit. This is the sort of behavior.
And that's a generalization. We do know that there are good men and women in blue.
Certainly.
Yes, but obviously this problem has a much further, far-reaching consequences. We have Temba in the Val. Hello to you.
Cindy, how are you?
I'm very well. Thanks for asking. How are you?
I'm fine. Cindy, yeah, I hear always the time you are bringing the very sensitive topics, especially on the issue of this law of this country. Cindy, we don't have a law. We are in crisis in this country. The police, the very same police officers, are police that are working with the criminals. Let's be fair. Let's not hide. We've made a big mistake to remove some other big what
specialized units in the police.
The white police. Remember when the time there was those white police that they were calling whatever names. They were working those people, and I'm definitely sure if we can bring those people and we work with our police officers, the change will be there.
All right, Temba, thanks so much for your input. All right, Temba saying we have a serious crisis and the police are in cahoots essentially with criminals. Zweli, good afternoon to you, or rather good evening to you, and welcome. Ngiyaphila bhuti wami, sinezwa nini?
Siyaphila. Lihle kakhulu iphuzu umphathi wamaphoyisa libekayo, kodwa ke mina angikholelwa kakhulu kulo ngoba amaphoyisa ethu yiwona a-corrupt. Not ukuthi awazi situation eyenzakalayo emadorobheni abo, kodwa ngoba be-corrupt kwabona, bengathembani kwabona. So uma ngabe ethi the deployment will be led by amaphoyisa, still futhi baba misdirector lawo masoja abazobe bawathumele, angazi noma umphathi ucabangisise kahle le ndaba la.
All right, Zweli, thanks so much for your call. Musiri Tsiane from the South African Liberty Foundation joins us. Musiri, just in your view, clearly a sentiment of distrust between the police in that they are rogue themselves and perpetuate the gangster violence that we're seeing. How then, as a community, can we be encouraged to participate in crime combating by naming, etc., the perpetrators in our communities if there's no trust?
I think we have a serious problem as a society, wherein you would find that in most instances, police officers are having very difficult way of dealing with crime. Why do I say so? Because you will find that there are people who hero worship criminals. In by and large, the communities that you would find, whether in Western Cape, whether in Soweto, whether in anywhere else, you will find that those gangsters that live in there are hero worshipped by the community. They'll not even give information to the men in blue. Somebody will tell you that at one stage we once had, during the apartheid, the best police officers we ever had. That is totally not acceptable that somebody can hero worship the police officers of the then system that was abusive and that was making sure that our rights are not protected. Our men in blue are the best we have. To say that South Africa is the worst criminal country that you can ever be in, it's a fallacy, it's a lie. In South Africa, we are better off. People have no idea of the criminality elements that are happening all over the world. But as long as we do not participate as society ourselves, we do not ensure that we are able to pinpoint the criminal that lives within ourselves, police officers can never do this alone. We have to reactivate ourselves in consciousness, in morals, that we pursue and ensure that things that are done wrong, we're able to stand up and point at them. Most instances, we remain quiet. Most instances, we do not report these things as police officers. You will have the highest rates that are happening, but they are not reported. How are the police going to attend to this? We've got to have society that participates.
Okay, Musiri, just stay on the line. Mr. Imam, in your view, best international practices that we can learn from, and primarily whether we have the international expertise, forensics, etc., to be able to finally deal with this tipping point of crime in this country?
Cindy, let me just start off by saying, if someone says that the situation of gang violence is only started now and did not exist pre-1994, that is not true. In fact, it was totally out of control even at that stage. Remember the socio-economic conditions of our people, the forced removal, the brutality in which they were treated, all these things play a role together with a high unemployment rate. And we talk about police. People are saying police are corrupt, and that's true. Lots of police are corrupt. And I agree with you, not every police person is corrupt. But what about, if you talk about a drug dealer, that drug dealer is somebody's child. What about those parents, that mother, that father, that brother, who knows my son is a drug dealer, who knows my son is a murderer? Why are they not also equally taking responsibility? Let us not just shift the blame onto the police. The situation on the ground is very serious, and I think that the police, first of all, need the assistance of the South African National. And if it's a measure that is being put in place to create a safer society for all, I think we should be welcoming it. But when you talk about internationally, yes, I think we do have some weaknesses. And I think, remember, 23 years into democracy, there's a lot needs to be done. I know the portfolio committee has been going. I was not part of it because I was busy on other meetings. They've been to the UK, they've been to China, they've been to a few countries. They have come back. We have made presentation to the South African police services. They are also going and getting training from Scotland Yard and things. But remember, ours is a unique situation. We can't just compare it to every other country. But we must also be mindful of the fact that crime exists in every single country, and I can tell you, if we think South Africa is bad, you must look at the statistics in some of the other countries. It is totally out of control as well. So under the circumstances, it's not easy for police alone. With corruption that exists, and corruption exists in all forms of society in the country and worldwide. But if we can bring in the defense force just to give them that added support and let the police lead and go out into these areas, I think we should be welcoming these things.
Yeah,
because,
sorry, Mr. Imam, we just have a caller on the wings who's been waiting very patiently. Paris, good evening to you, calling us from Freedom Park. Hello.
Good evening, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm also good. Okay, my comment in terms of the topic, I would say that our South African police services are a huge problem. Why do I say so? That in different communities, we always complain about our steps linked to these drug laws, and it is a reality. And for the mere fact that our police minister has not done anything concerning that, and then now here you are deploying the defense force to be led by the same steps which we are saying they are incompetent in a lot of cases in our communities. It's kind of it's like, it's bad. I don't see it as a good idea. Yet again, it can also show the weaknesses of our South African defense force. If they are not able to deliver on the tasks that they are given, then it will definitely mean that the South African defense force are weak, and we cannot make crime. We cannot fight crime. So
there's a lot that is resting on this decision by the police minister. We get you. Thank you so much, Paris, calling us from Freedom Park. Just in terms of the engagement and that kind of coexistence, albeit for a little while, between the army and civilians, won't that create an atmosphere of fear and intimidation and potential abuse of power?
Certainly. Firstly, if the solution is the deployment of the South African National Defence Force, the question that there needs to ask is that solution congruent to the problem? And I think there's a gross misdiagnosis of the problem by Fikile Mbalula in this instance. I think the problem with drugs and drug abuse is that we often treat people who use drugs and drug addicts as though they are criminals, when in most instances they are victims. the real criminals in the drug chain are not the people who use the drugs, but the people who sell the drugs. And insofar as an environment exists for them to continue selling drugs, they will forever continue selling drugs. The important part here is then, how do we disrupt the supply end of the chain and not the demand end of the chain? Importantly here, it needs to happen top down and not bottom up. This approach, by putting foot soldiers on the ground, is a bottom up approach. It needs to be the other way around, a top down approach, where we need to clamp down on high level syndicates with deep pockets for sophisticated infrastructure. And these
do
are
we
the
even
same
have the
people,
profiles though of those kind of syndicates?
Oftentimes we do. Oftentimes we do, because the very people who are reported to the police never get interrogated, because those dockets disappear. There's non-compliance from the police because they get the kickbacks over there. Again, it's not the entire police service. It's very few members, maybe a lot, but it's very important members. These are people who often are lieutenant generals. These are people who are often superintendents in certain instances, who have the ability to make these sort of things disappear. So the challenge with and curbing the drug problem in South Africa has to start with cleansing up the South African police services, not by adding another state organ in order to solve the problem. Importantly as well, the South African Defence Force is not trained for this sort of problem. And that's a big problem, because the ramifications that could come from this are dire. In many instances, this is how you create a real police state, where the flow of information becomes restricted and constricted by the mere presence of military officials in communities. Military officials do not belong in communities unless the threat in communities is one that they've been trained to combat, and that is incredibly violent ones where they have to shoot to kill. I think that's the only state of arm that has the direct mandate to often shoot to kill. And that's where you have civilians suffering from collateral damage and people dying in that instance. Oftentimes, these are young people, children, and single mothers.
Yeah, and of course we'll test whether the president will just rubber stamp this particular decision, or whether they'd have to consider unintended consequences as well. Temba in the Val, good evening to you, and thanks for your patience. Thabo, I'm good, thank you.
Thabo, hey.
Yeah, Thabo.
Hey, you know what I'm thinking? I think the minister is doing right, because already the rate of the crime in South Africa is alarming. Started to reduce, but what they must do, they must go first to the schools and try maybe to introduce programs that will help, because most of the gangsters are from schools. And then another thing, again, even the Home Affairs, the social development, they must play their role. Social development, they must try, because they're the ones who deal with social issues. They're the ones who,
but we can't absolve ourselves as community members. If you are aware of anybody harboring a criminal, for example, you need to report it and make sure that that person is eliminated from society. But I get your point, Thabo. Thanks indeed. Elias Tegwini, good evening to you.
Good evening, ma'am.
How are you?
I'm all right, and you all?
I'm good, thanks. What's your comment or question?
Thank you, ma'am. You see, the comment, we got a really very big problem on our society. The biggest problem is on the police is the politicians. You see, the politicians, they are right on the head. And they are the one, they are controlling everything. And when they're putting the people on the police force, they are the one, they're electing the people to put them on the top position.
All right, but Elias, I'm sorry, you're going to have to wrap up very briefly because of time constraints, but I hear you in the sense that if the leadership in itself is rotten or they're not the suitable candidates, that it will cascade into the rest of the police force. But let's engage Mosiritsia, and in terms of the special units that used to be in the police force dealing specifically with narcotics and drug-related crimes, do you think that this needs to be reinstituted and the dismantling thereof had resulted in this upswing of crime?
Well, you can put the blame in saying that if we do not have a special unit, that's why you would have the certain crime in a rise. But be that as it may, it all boils down to one and the same factor. As long as our society do not participate in capping violence, it's not going to go anywhere else. No matter what systems, no matter what special unit you can come up with, for as long as you do not have a participatory community that participates, that ensures that it deals with crime in itself. What we need to do is to educate our communities in large that crime doesn't pay. We've got to teach our children at a young age, ensuring that they indeed know that crime doesn't pay. And for all the time standing up and wanting to point a finger at police, it's all wrong. Our men in blue deserve the respect they should get. We cannot at any stage at all times trying to point a finger and say they are the ones to blame. We as a community are the ones to blame. We need to give them the support so that we can fight our crime and so that we can win. The men in blue of South Africa are doing their best. They're putting their lives out there. They're dying every day trying to protect us at all times. Anyone who stand up and say they are corrupt, not all can be perfect. And you can't stand up and say that our South African police services is the worst. It is the best we had. And so far we're doing well. Yes, it cannot be absolutely perfect because there is no such a thing as a perfect state. There's no such a thing as a perfect department. But be that as it may, we ought to be assisting them. We ought to be participating as a community at large. And the fact that we're going to have more units participating in there, whether specialized unit, what you call it, that unit, as long as it's got our support, it will succeed. If it doesn't have the community, doesn't have us as South African helping it, we will never go anywhere else.
All right, so we're going to have to leave it there. The South African Liberty Foundation chairperson. We'll come to you, Mr. Imam, in a bit. We go to Bongani in Hillbrow. Good evening to you.
Good evening, Sina. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm well, good. I just want to comment on the issue of bringing army to the society. Cindy, I understand people, the Minister of Police wants to bring armies. I think that's the H decision. We used to have people called the Omar Barret. I think you remember them. And they were very good unit, special unity. All of a sudden they disappeared. We didn't see them. That was a good unity. We used to see them walking around, putting a lot of discipline. Yeah, the minister did announce, I think in October, if I'm not mistaken, the specialized and tactical teams, which I think will resemble what you call amaparete. So, you know, these are multiple interventions. Question is, how best do we have a lasting solution to the rampant crime? Because that's what I'm saying. It's bringing armies another thing. You know, people, we like to judge things. When you start to bring armies, they will start again talk. I think Omar Barret were the best. They can bring Omar Barret with more, with a... Yeah, with more capacity. Bongani, thanks so much in Hillbrow. And just in conclusion, Mr. Imam, in your view that the fault lines seemingly are drawn in what you see the approach towards police enforcement. We've seen police officers being disarmed by community members in whatever circumstance. So if there's a level of disrespect or disdain for that matter, how then are you going to have a police or even a defense force that will be respected by communities and perpetrators alike?
You know, Cindy, and it is true that criminals have no respect for the police. There is no doubt, and it's and that is not only as a result of corruption amongst a few police officers, but I think they believe they have the power, they have the control, the availability of firearms. And firearms in South Africa, I think, you know, an average of people have 10 firearms. Why? I cannot understand that. And yet there are those that are pushing most murders, most of these gang violence, most cash in transit, are all gun related. So first of all, I think that is the problem. But the issue, you know what, I think people are missing a very important point all over the world. What is the responsibility of the military? Is to protect its people, to ensure that its people live in a safe society. And all I think government wants to do here and the minister wants to do is to give added security to the police officers. Like we've agreed that the criminals have no mercy for the police officers. So they want to give added security to police. The police will lead these operations. It's not a full-time thing. It's not a long-term thing. It's going to be done systematically in certain areas, to go out into these areas, clear the townships, clear the guns that are available, clear the drugs. But simultaneously, there's other interventions as well, like the border controls, in terms of all these drugs that are coming. You know, when people say police are corrupt, I can tell you, Cindy, I get calls all the time of sincere police officers who want to solve the problems of drugs. They call me and they complain about drug dealers. Yes, some of the stations we have done oversight visits, and commanders of the station admit they know who the drug dealers are. And we say, so what is the problem? Why are you not dealing with them? And that is why we are bringing in this, the National Defence Force, to help so that when they beef up security for police can go out there and do what they are supposed to do.
All right,
when
Mr. Imam.
Ahmed
Sheikh Imam, thank you so much for your time. A National Freedom Party Member of Parliament. We'll wrap it up in studio with Mr. Oliver Dixon, in that this is essentially a backup, if you will, for the police for this interim period. And we know how volatile it becomes over the festive season with more increased attacks on cash in transit vehicles, etc. So in your view, is this the only other option that the Minister has?
No, it's not. But Mr. Ahmad Sheikh said something incredibly important, that the role of the military is there to protect our borders. The strength of any successful drug network is one that is international, one that crosses borders and one that crosses oceans. Importantly, the South African drug problem is no different. The South African drug problem continues to exist insofar as there are foreign organizations that are able to supply that to come into the country. That means our borders are not as protected from drugs as we claim them to be. And this is a very cross-border international syndicate, one that doesn't just affect South Africa, but affects most of Africa. Importantly here is that the difference between the South African National Defence Force and the South African Police Services is that the South African Police Service, not only does it have a monopoly of violence similar to the South African Defence Force, but it collects evidence and it processes cases. Importantly, the South African Defence Force can't do that, so they can't be on the streets trying to do that.
All right, Oliver Dixon, we're going to have to leave it there. It seems the Minister of Police, Fikile Mbalula, is doomed if he does or if he doesn't. And in this case, deploying the army says it's going to be before the official December festive season. And we'll keep a close eye on that, on how the community receives the army. And let us know on your own experience in various areas. So we take a quick break. Do stay with ANN7 Prime.